In the winter of 1914, Europe was only a few months into what many still believed would be a short and decisive war. Instead, the conflict had already frozen into something far more brutal and unfamiliar. Along the Western Front, stretching from the North Sea through Belgium and into northern France, opposing armies faced each other from muddy trenches carved into the earth. The optimism of August had long vanished. Soldiers lived in constant cold, damp, fear, and exhaustion. Rats, disease, artillery fire, and the ever-present smell of death defined daily life. It was in this bleak landscape shaped by industrial warfare and political ambition that one of the most remarkable and human moments of the First World War occurred, the Christmas Truce of 1914, and with it, the legendary football match in No Man's Land. To understand why this moment became so powerful, it is important to understand the conditions under which it happened. By December 1914, both sides had failed to achieve a quick victory. The war of movement had turned into a war of positions. Trenches, barbed wire, and machine guns made large offensives costly and often futile. Soldiers on both sides were young men, many of whom had little personal hatred for the enemy they were ordered to kill. British, German, and French troops often lived only tens of meters apart, close enough to hear one another talk, sing, or curse. As Christmas approached, something unusual began to happen in certain sectors of the front. Despite orders from high command forbidding any form of fraternization, small gestures of humanity began to emerge. In the days leading up to Christmas, German soldiers placed candles on their trench parapets and decorated them with small Christmas trees. Carols could be heard drifting across the frozen battlefield. British soldiers responded with songs of their own. Instead of bullets, voices crossed no man's land. On Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, in several places along the front, soldiers cautiously climbed out of their trenches. What began as hesitant encounters soon turned into something extraordinary. Men who had been trying to kill each other days before now shook hands, exchanged greetings, and wished each other a Merry Christmas. Gifts were traded: cigarettes, food, buttons, caps, and alcohol. Perhaps most importantly, they worked together to recover and bury the dead who had been lying between the lines for weeks. It was in this context, informal, spontaneous, and deeply human, that football entered the story. Football was already hugely popular in Europe by 1914, particularly in Britain and Germany. Many soldiers had grown up playing the game in schoolyards, local clubs, or amateur leagues. Some British units even included professional footballers who had enlisted at the outbreak of war. In the strange calm of the Christmas truce, football felt like a natural way to pass the time and bridge the language barrier. According to letters and diaries written by soldiers, football games did indeed take place in no man's land. However, it is important to be precise. There was not one single, organised football match, but rather several informal kickabouts at different locations along the front. These games were chaotic, uneven, and spontaneous. There were no proper pitches, no goalposts, no referees, and no clear teams. Sometimes soldiers used an actual football. In other cases, they kicked around a tin can, a bundle of rags, or whatever, could roll across the frozen ground. One British soldier wrote of Germans producing a football from their trench and inviting the British to play. Another described dozens of men chasing the ball across the uneven terrain, laughing and slipping in the mud. In at least one account, a soldier recalled the Germans being more skilled players, suggesting they were used to playing the game regularly. This detail later helped fuel the popular myth that the Germans won a match 3-2, a scoreline often repeated in retellings of the story. But historians today agree on one key point. There is no reliable evidence of a formal match with a recorded score. The idea of a single, clearly defined football game has been shaped by memory, storytelling, and symbolism rather than documented fact. What did happen, however, is arguably more powerful. Football became a shared language, a moment of normal life in the most abnormal of circumstances. For a brief time, the war seemed to stop. Soldiers joked, posed for photographs, and treated each other not as enemies but as fellow human beings caught in the same nightmare. The football games, short and disorganized as they were, represented everything the war was not supposed to allow: cooperation, joy, and mutual recognition. This is why the football match of Christmas 1914 has become such a powerful symbol. It stands as a reminder that the men in the trenches were not monsters or faceless soldiers, but individuals with homes, families, and shared cultural experiences. The ball rolling across no man's land became a quiet act of resistance against the machinery of war. However, this moment of peace did not last. In the days following Christmas, officers on both sides reasserted control. High command was alarmed by reports of fraternization. The truce, they feared, undermined discipline and made it harder to convince soldiers to fight. Orders were issued to resume hostilities. In some areas, artillery fire was deliberately restarted to force men back into their trenches. By New Year's Day, the war had largely returned to its brutal routine. The Christmas Truce of 1914, including the football games, would never happen on the same scale again. As the war dragged on, casualties mounted, hatred deepened, and propaganda hardened attitudes. Later Christmases were marked by heavy fighting rather than song and sport, yet the memory endured. In the decades after the war, the story of the football match took on a life of its own. Veterans told it to their children and grandchildren. Writers and filmmakers embraced it as a symbol of hope. In 2005, the film Joyeux Noël brought the story to a global audience, dramatizing the truce and placing football at its emotional center. Football associations, including FIFA and the English Football Association, have referenced the match in commemorations, advertisements, and memorial events. Critics sometimes argue that the story has been romanticized, that focusing on a football match risks trivializing the horror of the war, but others see the opposite. The power of the story lies precisely in its contrast with the violence surrounding it. It does not deny the brutality of World War I. It highlights it by showing how extraordinary this moment of peace truly was. The football games of Christmas 1914 did not stop the war. They did not change political decisions or military strategies, but they revealed something essential about human nature. Even in a system designed to dehumanize, people look for connection. Even in a battlefield defined by death, there can be moments of life. In the end, the question of whether the Germans won 3-2 matters very little. What matters is that, for a few hours, the lines were blurred. No man's land, a space meant only for killing, became a football field. Soldiers became players, enemies became teammates. And for one brief Christmas, the sound of gunfire was replaced by laughter and the soft thud of a ball rolling across frozen ground. That is why, more than a century later, we still remember the football match of World War I, not as a sporting event, but as a quiet reminder of humanity in the darkest of times. If this story moved you, surprised you, or made you see history from a different angle, don't forget to give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who love these kinds of stories. If you'd like to see more historical moments like this, where sport, culture, and humanity collide in unexpected ways, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.